Adrian Koss had never expected to save an entire civilization before lunch, but the universe had a way of ignoring his expectations. The stellar fragment had appeared on his sensors 3 weeks ago, a rogue chunk of collapsed matter tumbling through space on a collision course with the HFY home system's sun. The math was simple and terrible: impact in 72 hours, chain reaction in the star's core, and 5 billion dead within a week. He should have reported it and moved on. That was the smart play. Instead, he'd spent 3 days running calculations that made his head hurt, jury-rigging gravitational anchors from salvaged parts, and violating at least 6 laws of physics he was pretty sure were important. The wandering echo had taken radiation damage that would cost a fortune to repair. His hands still shook when he thought about how close the deflection had come to failing, and he'd survived on coffee and stress for longer than was medically advisable. But it worked. The fragment veered off course, the sun stabilized, and 5 billion HFY woke up to a future they'd nearly lost. Now he stood in a ceremonial shuttle being flown to the surface by a pilot who kept calling him Savior Koss, despite his repeated requests to just use Adrian. The capital city of Ashara spread below them, crystalline towers rising toward aurora-painted skies, gardens that glowed with bioluminescence, an architecture that suggested a civilization that had been building beautiful things for a very long time. The pilot gestured toward the viewport. "The Grand Palace, Savior Koss. Queen Lysara herself will receive you." Adrian tried not to think about that too hard. He'd seen images of Queen Lysara, everyone in this sector had. The Eternal Flame, they called her. 300 years old, ruler of 40 systems, and reportedly brilliant, ruthless, and completely terrifying. Exactly the kind of person Adrian preferred to avoid in favor of nice, quiet stellar phenomena that didn't have opinions about him. The palace was even more overwhelming than he'd imagined. Halls of living crystal, warriors in armor that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced, and crowds of HFY citizens who'd come to witness the ceremony. They watched him pass with expressions of awe that made his skin crawl. He was just an engineer who'd gotten lucky with math. He didn't feel like someone worth this much attention. The throne room took his breath away. Vast and soaring, its walls seemed made of light itself. Nobles in formal regalia lined the space, and at the far end, elevated on a dais of silver and starlight, sat the queen. Lysara was everything the Hollows suggested and nothing like them at all. Tall and regal, her skin bearing luminescent patterns that flowed like rivers of light. Her ears rose in elegant curves, adorned with precious metals. Her eyes were deep violet, the color of nebulae, and when they fixed on him, Adrian felt like every secret he'd ever kept was suddenly visible. A chamberlain announced him in formal high HFY. Adrian caught his name, the word Savior, and something that might have been cosmic miracle or lucky idiot. The translation was unclear. He bowed as he'd been coached, managed not to fall over, and called that a victory. Queen Lysara's voice was clear and resonant. "Adrian Koss of Earth, you have done our people a service beyond measure. You saw our peril and acted when you had no obligation to do so. You risked your life and your ship to save a civilization not your own. For this, we owe you a debt that cannot be quantified." Adrian shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Your Majesty, I just did what anyone would do." Amusement rippled through the court. The Queen's expression softened slightly. "Most would not. Most would have calculated the odds and fled. You calculated the odds and stayed." She gestured, and advisors began bringing forward offerings. Crystalline matrices that pulsed with inner light, worth more than Adrian would earn in 10 lifetimes. Ancient artifacts from dead civilizations, priceless beyond measure. Deeds to mining operations that could fund entire colonies. Even the command codes to a warship that looked capable of glassing a moon. Each offering was more extravagant than the last. Adrian felt increasingly out of his depth with every presentation. He was a freelance engineer with a salvaged ship and a tendency to take risks. He didn't need warships. He didn't even know what he'd do with one. Then Queen Lysara raised her hand and the procession stopped. The court went silent. Advisors exchanged confused glances. The queen rose from her throne with deliberate grace and descended the steps of the dais. Every eye in the massive hall tracked her movement. She crossed the space between them, her luminescent patterns shifting through colors Adrian was beginning to suspect meant something significant. She stopped directly before him, close enough that he could see the intricate details of light beneath her skin, the way it pulsed in rhythm with something he couldn't identify. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "I want only one thing," she said, her voice soft but carrying through the entire hall with perfect clarity. Then she spoke his name. Not Savior Kas or Adrian Kas of Earth. Just Adrian. The name his mother used. The name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in years, not since he'd left home to chase problems across the stars. The court erupted into chaos. Whispers became shouts, became a wall of sound that Adrian couldn't parse. The advisors looked shocked. The warriors looked like they couldn't decide if this was a celebration or a crisis. The chamberlain beside Adrian had gone pale enough that his luminescent patterns had faded almost to white. The queen extended her hand, palm up, in a gesture Adrian didn't recognize, but that felt monumentously important. Her luminescent patterns blazed gold, warm and bright and somehow expectant. "Will you accept?" Queen Lysara asked, and there was something in her voice, something vulnerable beneath all that ancient authority, that made Adrian realize this wasn't just protocol. This was personal. Adrian stared at her hand. He had absolutely no idea what was happening. He didn't know what he was being asked to accept. But every instinct he'd honed over years of navigating dangerous situations screamed that this moment mattered more than anything he'd ever done. He looked up, met those violet eyes, and saw something that surprised him. Hope. Genuine, fragile hope in the gaze of someone who probably hadn't felt that in a very long time. "Yes," he said, because what else could he say? "I accept." The queen's smile could have powered a sun. She took his hand in hers, and the court exploded into noise. Celebration, shock, protest, and joy, all mixing into something Adrian couldn't begin to understand. He just agreed to something. Something significant. Something that clearly changed everything based on the way people were looking at him now. Some with joy, some with concern, and a few with what looked suspiciously like pity. The chamberlain leaned close, his voice barely audible over the din. "Congratulations, honored consort. May your bonding bring light to both our peoples." Adrian's brain snagged on the word consort, like a ship catching on an asteroid, and refused to move past it. Adrian woke in a bed approximately 3 times larger than necessary and significantly more comfortable than anything he'd slept in for years. The ceiling above him displayed a gentle sunrise simulation, or what passed for sunrise here, which involved colors Earth's sun had never produced. He sat up slowly, trying to piece together the previous evening's events through a haze of exhaustion and culture shock. He'd been escorted to these quarters by servants who treated him like he might shatter if handled roughly. There had been a feast where he sat beside the queen herself, every word he spoke analyzed by dozens of watchful nobles. There had been toasts in languages he didn't understand and ceremonial gestures he tried to mimic without embarrassing himself. What there had not been was a clear explanation of what exactly had happened in that throne room. A soft chime announced a visitor. Adrian barely had time to make himself presentable before a young HFY entered, slender, with bright green luminescent patterns and an expression of barely controlled anxiety. "Honored consort," they said, bowing so deeply Adrian worried about their spine. "I am Revan. I have been assigned as your personal attendant. How may I serve you this morning?" Adrian's brain performed an emergency stop on the word consort again. "Okay, before we go any further, I need you to explain something to me using very small words and possibly visual aids. What exactly did I agree to yesterday? Revan's patterns shifted to uncertain blue. The bonding, honored consort. When Queen Lysara spoke your personal name before the court, it was a formal declaration of choosing. You are to be her bonded partner, her consort. The ceremony is scheduled for 1 month from now, which gives time for you to learn our customs and prepare for your new role. Adrian sat down heavily on the nearest chair. Let me see if I understand this correctly. When I saved your son, the queen decided to marry me as payment. Not as payment, Revan corrected gently. As choice, the queen could have given you any treasure in the empire. She chose to give herself. To name someone before the full court is the highest honor among our people. It means she has recognized in you the qualities she values most and wishes to bind her life to yours. I met her yesterday. For approximately 5 minutes. Queen Lysara has lived for 3 centuries, honored consort. She has learned to recognize what matters quickly. Revan hesitated. If I may speak plainly, the queen has never named anyone before. In 300 years of rule, she has remained unbonded. Many believed she never would, that she chose you, a human, an outsider, someone who wanted nothing from her. It has significance. This information did not make Adrian feel better. If anything, it added pressure he wasn't remotely prepared for. He was supposed to be fixing gravity wells and mapping stellar anomalies, not becoming royalty to an alien civilization. A summons arrived for breakfast with the queen. Revan helped him into clothes that were far more formal than his usual grease-stained work gear, soft fabrics in deep blues that apparently marked him as royalty now. Adrian barely recognized himself in the mirror. The breakfast chamber was mercifully private. Just him, the queen, and enough food to feed a small crew. Lysara was already seated, wearing simpler robes but still radiating authority that made the air feel heavier. She looked up as he entered, and her luminescent patterns shifted to warm gold. You look like your ship just suffered catastrophic engine failure. Adrian sat carefully. I've been told I'm engaged to an alien queen I met yesterday. It's a similar feeling. To his surprise, Lysara laughed, a warm, genuine sound that transformed her face from regal to almost approachable. Revan explained the naming customs, I take it. They tried, I'm still processing. The queen poured him something that steamed and smelled like spiced citrus. Ask your questions, Adrian. I can see them building behind your eyes. He accepted the cup, grateful for something to occupy his hands. Why me? You rule 40 systems. You could have anyone. Why choose the random human who happened to fix your son? Lysara was quiet for a long moment, her patterns shifting to contemplative silver. Because random human who happened to fix our son is not an accurate description. You are someone who saw an impossible problem and solved it because it needed solving, not because there was profit in it. Someone who risks everything for strangers. She met his eyes. I have lived 3 centuries surrounded by people who want something from me. Power, favor, wealth. You wanted nothing. You didn't even want recognition. That is rare, precious. So you decided to marry me. I decided to choose you, yes. There is a difference. She set down her cup. Among my people, the naming is about recognizing in another person the qualities that matter most. I named you because I saw integrity without performance, courage without ego, brilliance without arrogance. I saw someone who might understand what it means to stand beside a throne without trying to claim it. Adrian didn't know how to respond to that. He'd never thought of himself as particularly special, just someone who was good at math and bad at leaving problems unsolved. What if I'm not what you think I am? He asked quietly. Lysara's smile was gentle. Then we discover that together, but I do not believe I am wrong, Adrian. I have 300 years of reading people. She paused. You could refuse. I would release you from the naming if you truly cannot bear it. It would be politically complicated, but I will not trap you. Adrian looked at her, really looked. at the ancient power barely contained in that elegant frame, at the loneliness he was beginning to glimpse beneath the crown, at someone who had everything except what she apparently wanted most, to be chosen for herself rather than what she represented. "I'm not refusing," he heard himself say. "I'm just adjusting." The warmth in Lysara's expression could have lit systems. "That is all I ask." They ate in more comfortable silence. Lysara asked about his work, his travels. Adrian found himself relaxing, talking about gravitational anomalies and stellar cartography with someone who actually understood the technical details. The Queen was brilliant, not just politically but scientifically. Her questions challenged his assumptions in ways that made him excited to explore problems from new angles. By the time breakfast ended, Adrian had almost forgotten to be terrified. Almost. The rest of the day dissolved into a blur of appointments. Cultural advisors teaching him formal etiquette, tailors measuring him for ceremonial robes, security briefings about protocols he'd need to follow. He learned that, as the Queen's named consort, he'd have responsibilities that went far beyond anything he'd imagined. Access to classified information, a voice in certain councils, ceremonial duties that would require him to represent the HFY Empire. It was overwhelming, but somewhere beneath the panic, Adrian found something unexpected: curiosity. This was a problem unlike any he'd faced. Maybe that's why, when evening came and he found himself in the palace garden staring at unfamiliar stars, he didn't feel the urge to run. Lysara found him there. She sat beside him without preamble, too much for one day. "I went from fixing gravity anchors to being royalty in about 12 hours, so yes." "You can still leave," Lysara said quietly. "If this is truly unbearable." Adrian looked at her, at 300 years of loneliness carefully hidden beneath duty, at someone powerful enough to command worlds but vulnerable enough to risk rejection by choosing him. "What do you want?" he asked, really. Her patterns shifted to that warm gold. "I want a partner, someone who sees me as Lysara, not just Queen, someone who will challenge me, surprise me, remind me what it means to not carry everything alone." She hesitated. "I want what I saw in your eyes when you realized what the naming meant: fear, yes, but also curiosity. The same look you wore calculating how to save our son." Adrian laughed despite himself. "You're comparing yourself to a cosmic engineering problem." "I'm comparing us to an impossible equation that might have a solution." Her smile was wry. "Are you willing to try solving it?" He looked at the stars, the same darkness he'd spent years navigating alone. Then at the woman beside him who'd chosen him for reasons he was still trying to understand. "I've never walked away from an interesting problem," he admitted. Lysara's laugh echoed through the garden. "Then we have an understanding." And sitting beneath alien stars with a queen who'd named him, Adrian realized that, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone in the dark. The month before the formal bonding ceremony passed in a way that made Adrian question his understanding of time. Days felt simultaneously endless and far too short, packed with lessons that ranged from fascinating to absurd. He learned formal high HFY, which had 17 tenses and a grammar structure that made his head hurt. He learned court etiquette, discovering there were at least 30 different ways to address the Queen depending on context. He learned that HFY formal dining involved utensils he couldn't name and protocols that felt deliberately complicated. He also learned that not everyone was thrilled about the naming. During a court session where Adrian stood beside Lysara's throne, his designated position now, a noble named Korath made his displeasure clear. The elder HFY had silver-white markings and an expression that suggested he'd been disapproving of things for several centuries and wasn't about to stop now. "Honored consort," Korath said, his tone making the title sound like an insult, "you have spent mere weeks among us. How can you possibly understand the complexities of governing an empire that has stood for millennia?" The chamber went silent. Lysara's patterns shifted to warning red, but before she could respond, Adrian leaned forward. You're absolutely right, he said calmly. I don't understand governing an empire, but I understand systems on the verge of collapse and what it takes to save them. I understand looking at impossible problems without preconceptions about how things should work. He met Koreth's gaze. Sometimes the best solutions come from outside perspectives. Like a composite alloy, mixing elements creates something stronger than either alone. Or a binary star system, two different masses creating stable orbits through their differences. There was a pause. Then Thessa, a younger military commander, actually smiled. Engineering metaphors, I like this one, Your Majesty. Koreth didn't look pleased, but he inclined his head in grudging acknowledgement. After the session, Lysara pulled Adrian aside, her patterns glowing warm gold. You handled Koreth better than most of my advisors manage. He's been questioning my decisions for decades. He's not wrong to be concerned, Adrian said. I am an outsider, but that doesn't mean I can't learn or that my perspective isn't valuable. Spoken like someone who's already thinking like a consort, Lysara's smile was proud. You're going to surprise them all, Adrian. His afternoons were spent with scholars learning HFY history, a civilization built on principles of balance, harmony, and collective memory. Every decision considered how it would echo across centuries. Adrian found it both beautiful and terrifying, the weight of deep time pressing down on every choice. But evenings were his favorite. That's when protocol relaxed and he and Lysara could simply talk. They walked palace gardens where gravity-defying fountains arced through air. They shared meals and discussed everything from stellar mechanics to philosophy. Adrian learned that Lysara loved terrible puns, had strong opinions about spacecraft design, and had once spent 20 years living as a common merchant to better understand her people. Lysara learned that Adrian had visited 70 star systems, played an instrument he'd built from salvaged parts, and had a habit of solving problems by talking to himself in technical language that sounded almost poetic. One evening, sitting by a fountain that looped water in impossible spirals, Lysara asked the question hanging between them. Are you happy, Adrian? He considered this carefully. Happy is complicated, overwhelmed definitely. Confused frequently, but also engaged, interested, less alone than I've been in years. He looked at her. What about you? Any regrets about naming the strange human? Lysara laughed softly. None. Though I underestimated how much you challenge court expectations. Thessa told me you spent 3 hours explaining orbital mechanics to nobles using fruit as demonstration models. They asked about my work. I got enthusiastic. They were enchanted. Her patterns shifted to warm gold. You make them see differently, see me differently. I have been the eternal flame so long they forget I am also simply Lysara. You remind them. Adrian reached out tentatively and took her hand. The luminescent patterns beneath her skin pulsed gently against his palm. Is that good? Essential, Lysara said softly. A throne is lonely, Adrian. I have been there for 3 centuries. You make it less so. The bonding ceremony approached. Adrian was fitted for robes that blended HFY and human design, a symbolic merger. He learned ritual words and gestures, trying not to think about the broadcast that would reach 40 systems. 3 days before the ceremony, complications arrived in the form of a Korvathi ambassador, representatives from a neighboring empire with tense relations with the HFY. The ambassador questioned whether introducing unpredictable elements like a human consort might destabilize regional politics. Before Lysara could respond, Adrian spoke. Ambassador, do you consider adaptation unpredictable or strategic? An empire that incorporates new perspectives while maintaining core values isn't weak, it's antifragile. It gets stronger from challenges rather than breaking under pressure. He leaned forward. My presence isn't instability, it's evolution. The real question is whether your borders are more secure with an HFY empire that's flexible and forward-thinking, or one that's rigid and brittle. The ambassador blinked, then actually smiled. An interesting perspective, honored consort. Perhaps we underestimated you. Perhaps that's precisely the point. The meeting ended cordially. Several council members approached Adrian afterward with new respect. Even Korath gave him an acknowledging nod. That night, Lysara found Adrian on an observation deck. "You continue to surprise me." "I'm surprising myself. Getting better at this court thing." "You are," she was quiet. "Are you ready for the ceremony?" Adrian thought about the month behind him. The learning, the challenges, the gradual shift from panic to something warmer. Morning conversations and evening walks. The way Lysara's patterns shifted when amused, the sharpness of her mind, the weight of loneliness she carried with such grace. Terrified, he admitted, but also, yes, ready. Lysara's smile lit systems. "Good, because I'm terrified too. You're a 300-year-old queen. And I'm bonding with a human engineer who fixes impossible problems with math and optimism. Terror is rational." They stood watching stars wheel past, two people from different worlds choosing to bridge the distance. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. The morning of the bonding ceremony, Adrian woke to the realization that his life was about to change in ways he still didn't fully comprehend. Revan appeared with ceremonial robes that were frankly works of art. Midnight blue woven with silver threads that caught light like captured stars. Detailed with patterns representing both Ashari tradition and human constellation maps. A statement in fabric form. The grand hall had been transformed. Bioluminescent flowers cascaded from impossible heights. Holographic displays would broadcast this moment to millions across 40 systems. Representatives from Earth had arrived, including people from Adrian's past who looked equal parts proud and bewildered. His mother had sent a message, tears and laughter, and completely inaccurate claims about always knowing he was destined for greatness. The hall filled with thousands. Adrian took his position at the altar platform, a circle of polished crystal that seemed to float in the hall's center. His heart hammered. Then Lysara entered and everything else faded. She wore robes of living light, her luminescent patterns blazing gold and silver in cascades of complex beauty. Ceremonial bands adorned her long ears, chiming softly with each step. She wasn't just beautiful, she was transcendent, ancient power and present grace moving together. But when their eyes met across that vast space, Adrian saw past the spectacle to the person beneath. Lysara, who loved bad puns and stellar mechanics, who'd been lonely despite ruling worlds, who'd chosen him. She joined him on the platform. An elder priest began the ceremony in high Ashari that Adrian now understood. Words about balance, about joining forces to create stability, about names spoken and recognized across the cosmos. Ritual exchanges, light crystals passed between them. Spoken vows that Adrian delivered steadily despite his nerves. Then came the testimony of choice, the moment when court members could challenge the bonding by questioning worthiness. It was archaic tradition, rarely invoked, but protocol demanded the opportunity. Korath stood. Of course it was Korath. The hall went silent. The elder noble approached the platform, his expression grave. "I invoke testimony. Not to challenge the queen. Her wisdom is beyond question. But I question this human. Adrian Koss, by what right do you accept this honor when you are young, inexperienced, not of our people?" Adrian took a breath. He could give a political answer, but something told him that wasn't what was needed. Korath was voicing fears about change, about tradition being lost. "You're right," Adrian said clearly. "I'm young by your standards. I've never governed anything more complex than a single-person starship. I don't know your traditions like someone born to them. By every traditional measure, I'm unqualified." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beside him, Lysara's hand found his silent support. "But," Adrian continued, "I know what it means to stand in the dark and choose to turn on a light. Your son was dying, and I could have calculated the terrible odds and left. Instead, I stayed, not because I expected reward but because it was right. He looked at Korath. You ask by what right I stand here. By the same right anyone stands anywhere, because I was chosen and I chose to answer. Lysara named me not despite my differences but because of them. She saw in an outsider what centuries of courtiers hadn't shown her, the freedom to be seen simply as herself. He turned to face the assembled crowd. I can't promise perfection. I'll make mistakes. I'll need guidance. But I promise to face every challenge the way I faced your dying son, with everything I have, unwilling to accept failure, absolutely committed to finding solutions no matter how impossible they seem. Silent, then Thessa stood. I withdraw any question of worthiness. The consort speaks truth. Voices joined hers. Within moments, dozens stood in support. Even some traditionalists looked moved. Korath remained standing, but his expression had shifted. Finally, he bowed. The testimony is satisfied. The bonding may proceed. Relief washed through Adrian. Lysara's patterns blazed brilliant gold, her grip tight with gratitude and pride. The priest completed the ceremony. Final vows spoken, Lysara's voice and Adrian's, overlapping in ancient words that bound them. When finished, when crystals exchanged and names formally spoken before witnesses, the priest raised their joined hands. Behold the bonded, Queen Lysara and consort Adrian. May their union bring wisdom to the HFY Empire and all allied peoples. The hall erupted. Music swelled. HFY harmonics blended with human orchestral elements. People flooded forward with congratulations. Adrian was embraced by strangers, his hands shaken until numb. Someone from Earth's delegation was crying. Revan looked proud enough to glow. Through it all, Lysara remained beside him, steady anchor in chaos. When they finally found a moment of relative privacy, she leaned close. Thank you for what you said to Korath. You didn't have to bear yourself like that. Yes, I did, Adrian replied. They needed to know I understand what this means, what you mean. He hesitated. Also, I meant every word. Lysara's smile was radiant. I know, that's why I chose you. She glanced at the celebration, ready for the next impossible problem. What's that? Learning to live with me. I've been told I'm particular about temperature settings. Adrian laughed, genuine joy surprising him. I spent 6 months in a ship where gravity fluctuated randomly. I can handle it. The celebration continued late. Formal dances Adrian stumbled through with Lysara's patient guidance, toasts in multiple languages. His former captain pulling him aside. You always aimed higher than anyone thought possible. Glad you found something worth aiming for. As twin moons rose over Ashara, Adrian and Lysara finally escaped to the gardens. They stood beneath trees glowing with bioluminescent fruit, looking at stars that suddenly felt different, not lonely anymore, not just navigation points. Nervous? Lysara asked. Terrified, Adrian admitted. But also excited. Is that normal? If it is, I share your condition. She laced fingers through his. We're navigating uncharted territory. 2 civilizations watching to see if this works. Tremendous pressure. You really know how to romance a person. I've been practicing. Her patterns shifted to warm amber. Truly, Adrian regrets. He thought about his old life. Solitude, endless wandering, solving problems alone. Then the past month, challenges, yes, but also connection. Conversations stretching for hours. The gradual realization that being chosen can be terrifying and right simultaneously. No regrets, he said firmly. This is terrifying and I'll probably mess up spectacularly. But I've spent years drifting alone through space. Standing still beside someone beside you is actually the scariest, bravest thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't change it. Lysara's patterns pulsed with complex emotion. She pulled him close, and they stood together beneath alien stars witnessing something unprecedented. A partnership bridging worlds, built on a name spoken in gratitude and answered in courage. Above them, the wandering echo sat in dock, ready for when they'd sail it together. Not wandering anymore. not echoing into emptiness, but sailing with purpose and partnership toward whatever challenges awaited. The queen and her consort, the ancient ruler and the young engineer, two people from different worlds who chose each other when tradition said they shouldn't, wisdom said they couldn't, and their hearts said they must. "Ready for tomorrow?" Lysara asked. Adrian grinned. "Tomorrow and every impossible day after. Let's see what we can build together." And somewhere in the vast dark between stars, two civilizations leaned closer, bound by names spoken and kept, by choices made with open eyes, and by the simple, revolutionary act of seeing someone truly and saying yes.